Jake Morrison stood in the massive chamber and looked around at all the strange faces staring back at him. The Galaxy Council meeting hall was bigger than any building he had ever seen back on Earth. The ceiling stretched so high that it disappeared into darkness above them. Lights from a dozen different alien suns created a rainbow of colors that danced across the polished floor. He adjusted his dark blue uniform and checked his notes one more time. Today was the day humanity would finally join the Galactic Trade Federation. At least that was what he had hoped when he woke up this morning. Now, as he watched the alien delegates file into their seats, he was not so sure. The Zephyrians walked past him first. Their bodies looked like they were made of living crystal that caught the light and threw it back in sharp, colorful beams. They moved with slow, careful steps as if they were afraid of breaking something. Jake had learned that they were one of the oldest races in the galaxy. They had been traveling between stars for over 20,000 years. Behind them came the Rexians. These creatures were nothing like the delicate Zephyrians. Each one stood over 8 feet tall and had muscles that bulged under their thick, gray skin. Their heavy footsteps echoed through the chamber like thunder. Jake knew they were warriors by nature, but they had learned to use words instead of weapons to solve their problems. Most of the time, Lisa Turner, his second in command, leaned close to him and whispered, "Remember, we need their votes. Whatever they say, we have to stay calm and polite." Jake nodded but did not take his eyes off the gathering aliens. He had spent 5 years preparing for this moment. He had studied every species that would be voting today. He knew their histories, their cultures, their likes and dislikes. He had practiced his speech 100 times until he could say it perfectly. In his sleep, the human delegation sat at a small table near the back of the chamber. There were only 6 of them compared to the hundreds of aliens filling the enormous space. Jake felt very small and very far from home. Council Speaker Thrax entered the chamber last. He was a hegemony prime, an insect-like creature that stood 12 feet tall on 6 thin legs. His body was covered in a hard, black shell that gleamed like polished metal. When he spoke, his voice came from somewhere deep in his chest and sounded like grinding stone. "The Galaxy Council will now come to order," Thrax announced. His mandibles clicked together as he spoke, making a sound like breaking glass. "Today we consider the application of the species known as humans for full membership in the Galactic Trade Federation." Jake felt his heart beat faster. This was it. Everything humanity had worked for over the past 3 centuries had led to this moment. If they were accepted, human merchants could trade freely across the galaxy. Human scientists could access the great libraries of knowledge that older civilizations had built. Human explorers could visit worlds that had been closed to them before, but first they had to prove they were worthy. "The chair recognizes the delegate from Zephyria," Thrax said. The crystalline being rose slowly from her seat. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The Zephyrian Empire has reviewed the human application with great care. We find their technological development to be adequate for a young species. However, we have concerns about their readiness for full membership." Jake kept his face blank, but inside he felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. This was not how these meetings usually started. He had watched recordings of other species being accepted into the Federation. The process was normally just a formality. "What concerns?" Speaker Thrax asked. "The humans have been spacefaring for only 300 years, the Zephyrian delegate continued. They have spread across many star systems very quickly, but they have done so without proper guidance from established civilizations. They make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They fight wars among themselves even as they seek to join our peaceful federation." More aliens began to nod in agreement. Jake saw the Eldorian representative, a being made of pure energy, contained in a glowing field, pulse brighter as if excited by what he was hearing. "The chair recognizes the delegate from Eldoria," Thrax said, the energy being floated upward slightly as it spoke. Its voice sounded like electricity crackling through the air. "The Eldorian Collective agrees with our Zephyrian friends. these humans show concerning signs of aggression. In their brief time in our galaxy, they have established military bases on dozens of worlds. They carry weapons even to peaceful meetings like this one. Jake looked down at the ceremonial sword hanging at his side. It was a tradition for human diplomats to carry it, a symbol of their willingness to defend their people. He had never thought of it as threatening before. Furthermore, the Eldorian continued, they cling to primitive concepts like individual identity and personal ownership. How can they truly understand the collective good when they cannot even share their thoughts with each other? The Catherian delegate stood up next. She had 4 arms and multiple eyes that could look in different directions at the same time. The Catherian Republic has similar concerns. Humans still practice religion and maintain separate cultures on different worlds. They have not achieved the unity that marks a truly advanced civilization. Jake felt Lisa tense beside him. He reached over and touched her arm gently, reminding her to stay calm. But inside, his own anger was growing. These aliens were talking about humanity like they were children who needed to be taught how to behave. Perhaps, the Catherian continued, it would be wise to grant them associate status for another century. Let them prove their worth through service to their betters. Let them learn from civilizations that have mastered the art of peaceful coexistence. The word betters hit Jake like a physical blow. He had expected some resistance to humanity's application, but this was something else entirely. These aliens were not just questioning whether humans were ready for membership. They were questioning whether humans were good enough to be equals, more. Delegates began to speak, and each one added new insults to the growing list. The Morphic Collective suggested that humans were too chaotic to be trusted with important decisions. The Netherian Assembly claimed that human technology was crude and dangerous. The Civian Commune argued that humans were too violent to be allowed free access to peaceful worlds. Jake listened to it all with growing amazement. These civilizations had achieved wonders that humanity could barely imagine. They had built cities that floated in space, created artificial worlds, and learned to travel faster than light. But they had also become soft and lazy. They had forgotten what it meant to struggle and fight and overcome impossible odds. They had forgotten what it meant to be truly alive. After an hour of listening to insults disguised as diplomatic concerns, Speaker Thrax finally turned to the human delegation. The chair recognizes Ambassador Morrison of Earth. Does the human delegation wish to respond to these observations? Jake stood up slowly. The entire chamber fell silent as hundreds of alien eyes focused on him. He had prepared careful, polite answers to every possible objection. He had practiced diplomatic language that would smooth over any tensions while advancing human interests. But as he looked out at the sea of condescending faces, he felt something change inside him. These aliens thought they were better than humans. They thought humanity needed to prove itself worthy of their approval. They thought humans should be grateful for whatever scraps of membership they were willing to offer. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Jake smiled, but it was not the diplomatic smile he had practiced. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey. Honored delegates, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. I thank you for your honest opinions about my species. Your words have been very educational. He paused and looked around the chamber, meeting as many alien eyes as he could. But before I respond to your concerns, I wonder if you would allow me to share a brief story about human history. I think you might find it interesting. Speaker Thrax's mandibles clicked together in a pattern that Jake had learned meant confusion. The giant insect creature tilted his head and stared down at the human ambassador with his large black eyes. We are not here to listen to human stories. Ambassador Morrison, Thrax said in his grinding voice, we are here to decide if your species is ready to join civilized society. Your time would be better spent answering the concerns that have been raised. Jake nodded politely but did not sit down. Of course, honored speaker. But I think my story will help address those concerns in a way that simple answers cannot. You see, you have made certain assumptions about humanity based on what you can observe right now, but you have not asked the most important question of all. The chamber stirred uneasily. This was not how these meetings usually went. Most species that applied for membership spent their time apologizing for their shortcomings and promising to do better. They did not ask to tell stories or suggest that the council had missed something important. "What question is that?" asked the Zephyrian delegate, her crystal body flickering with nervous energy. Jake turned to face her directly. "You have not asked how a species with primitive technology and crude fusion drives managed to spread across 300 star systems in less than 2 centuries. You have not asked how we built colonies on worlds that your own surveys said were impossible to live on. You have not asked how we created a working civilization that spans dozens of sectors, while most of your species were still learning to make fire." Lisa watched from her seat with growing amazement. This was not the careful diplomatic speech they had practiced for months. Jake was throwing away everything they had planned and going completely off script. Part of her wanted to stop him, but another part was fascinated to see where this would lead. The Vraxian delegate, a massive warrior whose species prided itself on strength and courage, leaned forward in his seat. "Your expansion was rapid, yes. But expansion without wisdom is just reckless breeding. Quantity is not the same as quality." "Rapid?" Jake laughed, and there was something in that laugh that made several aliens shift uncomfortably. "Honored delegate, let me put our expansion in perspective for you. In the time it took your species to develop faster than light travel, humanity fought 16 major wars, survived 3 extinction-level events, and colonized 47 star systems. We did not have the luxury of a peaceful galaxy to guide. Yes, we had to figure everything out for ourselves." Jake began to pace back and forth in front of the human delegation table. His movements were smooth and controlled, but there was an energy about him that reminded the watching aliens of a caged predator. "You mock our fusion drives and call our technology primitive," he continued. "But you forget that we built those drives from nothing. We started with chemical rockets that could barely reach our own moon. We developed nuclear power by splitting atoms in our basements. We created computers using vacuum tubes and later silicon chips that we had to invent ourselves. The Eldorian energy being pulsed with what Jake recognized as uncertainty. Your technological development is impressive for such a young species, but it lacks the refinement that comes from proper guidance." "Guidance?" Jake stopped pacing and stared at the glowing creature. "You think we needed guidance? Let me tell you about human guidance, honored delegate. When our planet was struck by massive asteroids, we learned to predict their paths and destroy them before they could hit us. When ice ages threatened to freeze our entire world, we learned to control our climate. When plagues killed millions of our people, we learned to read the code of life itself and rewrite it to save ourselves." The chamber was completely silent. Now, even the usual background hum of alien translation devices seemed muted. Jake had their full attention in a way that diplomatic politeness never could have achieved. "You call us primitive," Jake said, his voice growing stronger, "but let me share some facts about human primitiveness. We have built thriving cities in the vacuum of space where the temperature is absolute zero. We have established colonies on worlds where the air is poison and the ground is made of acid. We have created underground settlements on planets where the surface is constantly bombarded by deadly radiation." The Catherian delegates' multiple eyes all focused on Jake at once. "Survival is not the same as civilization, Ambassador. Animals survive. What matters is how a species treats its own kind and other forms of life." Jake smiled at her, and again it was not a diplomatic smile. "You want to know how we treat each other? During our worst wars, when billions died and entire continents were poisoned with radiation, we still maintained universities and hospitals. We still wrote poetry and created art. We still cared for our children and our elderly. We never stopped being human, even when being human meant facing impossible odds." He turned to address the entire chamber. "You talk about our violence as if it were a weakness, but you misunderstand what human violence really is. We do not fight because we enjoy destruction. We fight because we refuse to surrender. We fight because we believe some things are worth dying for. We fight because we will not accept defeat." The Morphic Collective Delegate, a creature that looked like liquid silver poured into a roughly humanoid shape, spoke up. But surely you must see that constant conflict prevents true progress. Look at what we have achieved through cooperation and peace. We have eliminated war, ended poverty, and created a galaxy where all species can live in harmony. Have you? Jake asked quietly. Or have you just stopped growing? When was the last time any of your species made a breakthrough that changed how you live? When did you last face a challenge that forced you to become something more than what you were before? When did you last do something that scared you? The silence stretched on for long seconds. Jake could see the aliens looking at each other uncertainly, as if they were asking themselves the same questions. You see, Jake continued, that is the difference between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. You have achieved stability by accepting limitations. You have found peace by giving up the drive to grow and change and become something better. You have built a perfect society by stopping evolution itself. Speaker Thrax's mandibles were clicking. Rapidly now, a sure sign of agitation. You speak as if our achievements are failures, Ambassador. We have maintained galactic peace for over 10,000 years. We have eliminated the chaos and suffering that comes from constant change. And in doing so, Jake replied, you have eliminated the possibility of becoming something greater than what you are. You have chosen safety over growth, comfort over challenge, predictability over discovery. You have built a museum, not a civilization. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Several delegates rose from their seats in anger, but Jake continued speaking before any of them could object. You want to know what makes humanity dangerous to your perfect system? It is not our weapons, or our technology, or our expansion rate. What makes us dangerous is that we refuse to accept that anything is impossible. We refuse to believe that we have reached the limits of what we can become. We refuse to stop dreaming of something better. Jake looked around the chamber one more time, meeting the eyes of every delegate who would look back at him. You have offered us associate membership, suggesting that we prove ourselves worthy through service to our betters. But I have a question for you, honored delegates. What happens when the servants become stronger than their masters? The chamber erupted in angry voices and flashing lights as the aliens began to argue among themselves. Jake stood calmly in the center of the storm, waiting for them to realize that everything had just changed. The chaos in the chamber lasted for several minutes before Speaker Thrax managed to restore order. His deep voice boomed over the arguing delegates, and slowly the angry voices died down. Jake remained standing calmly throughout it all, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the aliens with obvious interest. Ambassador Morrison, Thrax said, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled anger, you have made some very serious accusations against this council and the civilizations it represents. Do you have any proof to support these claims? Jake smiled and nodded. I do indeed, honored speaker. But first, let me ask you something. How long has it been since any species in this chamber discovered a new form of energy? How long since anyone invented a new type of faster-than-light drive? How long since anyone made a breakthrough that fundamentally changed how your people live? The chamber fell silent again. Jake could see the aliens looking at each other with uncomfortable expressions. It was clear that his questions had hit their mark. The Zephyrian Empire has refined our crystal technology, the crystalline delegate said defensively. We have made many improvements over the centuries. Improvements, Jake repeated, not inventions. Not discoveries. Improvements to things you already had. When did you last create something completely new? Zephyrian's crystal body dimmed slightly, and she did not answer. Jake turned to face the energy being from Eldoria. What about you, honored delegate? When did the Eldorian Collective last make a breakthrough in energy manipulation? When did you last discover a new way to exist? The glowing creature pulsed uncertainly. We have achieved perfect harmony with energy itself. What more could we need? Perfect harmony, Jake said thoughtfully. That sounds like you have stopped trying to grow? That sounds like you have decided you know everything there is to know about your own nature. He addressed the entire chamber now. Let me tell you about human progress, honored delegates. In the past 50 years alone, we have increased our average lifespan by 30%. We have eliminated most genetic diseases. We have learned to regrow lost limbs and organs. We have created artificial intelligence that can think faster than biological brains. Lisa activated a small device at their table, and holographic charts appeared in the air above them. The charts showed curves that climbed steadily upward, representing human advancement in dozens of different fields. In the past 20 years, Jake continued, we have developed nanotechnology that can repair our bodies at the cellular level. We have created fusion reactors that are smaller and more efficient than anything we had before. We have learned to manipulate gravity itself. The curves on the charts were steep and showed no signs of leveling off. Several alien delegates leaned forward to get a better look at the data. But most importantly, Jake said, we have done all of this while maintaining our individuality, our diversity, and yes, even our conflicts. We have not achieved progress by becoming the same. We have achieved it by celebrating our differences and using them to make each other stronger. The Vraxian delegate stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow over the nearby seats. You speak of conflict as if it were a virtue, human. Conflict brings only death and destruction. We have learned to resolve our differences through peaceful discussion, Jake nodded respectfully. And that is indeed an admirable achievement, honored delegate. But tell me, when did your people last face a challenge that tested their limits? When did they last have to adapt to survive? When did they last grow stronger because they had no choice? The Vraxian's expression grew thoughtful. It has been some time since we faced any real threats. Exactly, Jake said. You have eliminated the forces that drive evolution. You have removed the pressure that creates diamonds. You have built a safe, comfortable cage and convinced yourselves that it is paradise. The Morphic Collective delegate rippled with agitation. You make it sound as if suffering is necessary for advancement. Surely a truly advanced species would eliminate unnecessary hardship. Unnecessary hardship, yes, Jake agreed. But necessary challenges, no. The difference is crucial. We humans do not seek out suffering for its own sake. But we do not run from difficulties that make us stronger. We do not avoid problems that force us to become better than we were. He gestured to the holographic charts still floating above their table. Look at these curves again. Notice that our steepest advances came during our most difficult periods. Our greatest technological leaps happened during wars. Our most important medical discoveries came during plagues. Our most crucial environmental innovations came when our planet was dying. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the translation devices seemed muted. You want to know what makes humanity different from every other species in this galaxy? Jake asked. It is not our technology. It is not our expansion rate. It is not our military might. What makes us different is that we have never learned to accept defeat. We have never learned to say that something is impossible. We have never learned to stop trying to become something more. The Catherian delegates' multiple eyes all focused on Jake at once. But surely there must be limits to growth. Surely there must be a point where a species says that it has achieved enough. Jake stared at her for a long moment. Why? The simple question hung in the air like a challenge. The Catherian delegate opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Why should there be limits? Jake pressed. Why should we stop growing? Why should we stop learning? Why should we stop trying to become better than we are today? He turned to address the entire chamber. You have all reached a point where you decided that you were advanced enough. You decided that you had learned enough. You decided that you had grown enough. And from that moment, you began to die. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Several delegates recoiled as if they had been slapped. Not physically, Jake continued, but spiritually, intellectually, evolutionarily, you stopped being alive and started being preserved. You became museum pieces in your own galaxy. Speaker Thrax's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like a machine gun. You go too far, Ambassador. You insult the achievements of civilizations that were ancient when your species was still learning to use tools. Jake turned to face the towering insect creature directly. I insult nothing, honored speaker. I simply observe that ancient is not the same as advanced. Age is not the same as wisdom. Stability is not the same as strength. He paused and looked around the chamber one more time. You have all forgotten the most important truth in the universe. The moment you stop growing, you start dying. The moment you stop changing, you start decaying. The moment you stop trying to become something better, you become something worse. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake could see the impact of his words on the faces around him. Some looked angry. Some looked confused. But many looked thoughtful, as if they were considering ideas they had not entertained for centuries. So let me ask you one final question, Jake said quietly. When humanity returns to this chamber in 50 years, do you want to meet us as equals, who have grown alongside us? Or do you want to meet us as relics who have been left behind? Jake's question echoed through the chamber like thunder. The silence that followed was so complete that he could hear the soft hum of the life support systems in the walls. Hundreds of alien eyes stared at him, some with anger, some with confusion, and others with something that might have been fear. Speaker Thrax was the first to break the silence. His mandibles clicked together in patterns that Jake had learned meant deep thought mixed with growing alarm. Ambassador Morrison, you speak of returning in 50 years as if humanity will somehow surpass civilizations that have existed for thousands of years. This is the height of arrogance. Jake shook his head calmly. It is not arrogance, honored speaker. It is mathematics. Would you like to see the calculations? Before Thrax could respond, Lisa activated another display. New charts appeared in the air, showing projection curves that extended far into the future. The lines representing human advancement continued to climb steeply, while the lines representing the established galactic civilizations remained flat. These projections are based on our current rate of technological and social development, Jake explained. At our present pace, humanity will achieve faster than light communication within 10 years. We will master nanotechnology within 15 years. We will develop artificial intelligence that surpasses biological thinking within 20 years. The Eldorian energy being pulsed with agitation. These are wild fantasies, Ambassador. Such rapid development is impossible. It takes centuries to properly develop and test new technologies. Does it? Jake asked. Or does it take centuries when you have forgotten how to take risks? When you have become so afraid of failure that you test every small change for decades before implementing it? He gestured to the charts again. Humans developed nuclear weapons in 4 years when we were threatened with extinction. We went from no space travel to landing on our moon in 12 years when we were competing with each other. We created the internet in 20 years when we needed better communication. We always move fastest when we have no choice but to succeed. The Zephyrian delegate's crystal body flickered with nervous energy. But such rapid change is dangerous. Without proper safeguards, without careful planning, you could destroy yourselves. We could, Jake agreed, and we have come close many times. But we have learned from every near disaster. We have grown stronger from every mistake. We have become more careful without becoming paralyzed by fear. The Vifraxian delegate leaned forward in his seat. You speak of taking risks as if it were? Always wise, but some risks are too great. Some failures cannot be recovered from. Jake turned to face the massive warrior. That is where you are wrong, honored delegate. There is only one failure that cannot be recovered from. The failure to try it all. He began to pace again, his movements drawing every eye in the chamber. Let me tell you about human failures, honored delegates. We have poisoned our own planet and learned to clean it. We have created weapons that could destroy our entire species and learned to control them. We have built artificial intelligences that turned against us and learned to make them our partners instead of our masters. The Morphic Collective delegate rippled with confusion. You speak of these disasters as if they were achievements. They were, Jake said firmly. Every failure taught us something we could not have learned any other way. Every disaster showed us weaknesses we did not know we had. Every mistake made us stronger and wiser and more capable of surviving the next challenge. He stopped pacing and faced the chamber directly. You have all avoided failure by avoiding challenge. You have prevented disasters by preventing growth. You have achieved safety by giving up greatness. The Catherian delegates' multiple eyes all focused on Jake at once. But surely you must see that what you call greatness, others might call recklessness. How can you be certain that your rapid development will not lead to catastrophe? Jake smiled, and for the first time it was a genuinely warm expression. We cannot be certain, honored delegate. That is exactly the point. Certainty is the enemy of progress. Safety is the enemy of discovery. Comfort is the enemy of growth. The chamber stirred uneasily. These were concepts that the established civilizations had spent millennia trying to eliminate from their societies. You want to know what humanity's greatest strength is? Jake asked. It is not our technology or our military power or our expansion rate. Our greatest strength is that we are comfortable with uncertainty. We are willing to try things that might not work. We are prepared to fail if that failure teaches us something valuable. He gestured to Lisa, who activated a new display showing images from human colonies across the galaxy. The images showed cities built in impossible places on worlds that should not have been able to support life. Look at these colonies, Jake said. We built them without knowing if they would survive. We sent people to live on worlds where the air was poison and the ground was made of rock and metal. Many of those early colonies failed, people died. But we learned from every failure, and each new colony was stronger than the last. The images showed the progression clearly. The early colonies were small and basic, but the newer ones were magnificent cities that seemed to grow out of the hostile landscapes like living things. Your species would have spent centuries studying these worlds. Before attempting to colonize them, Jake continued, you would have run countless simulations and built elaborate safety systems. And by the time you were ready to act, we would have been living there for generations. Speaker Thrax's mandibles clicked with what Jake recognized as grudging respect. Your species does display remarkable adaptability. But adaptability without wisdom is merely survival instinct. And wisdom without adaptability is merely elaborate stagnation, Jake replied. You have gained wisdom by eliminating the need to adapt. We have gained adaptability by constantly facing new challenges. The question is, which approach produces a stronger species? The chamber fell silent again. Jake could see that his words were having an effect. The aliens were beginning to question assumptions they had held for centuries. Let me paint a picture for you, Jake said quietly. 50 years from now, humanity will return to this chamber. We will have twice as many colonies. We will have technology that makes our current capabilities look primitive. We will have faced new challenges and overcome them. We will have grown stronger and wiser and more capable. He paused and looked around the chamber. The question is, what will you have done during those 50 years? Will you have grown alongside us? Will you have rediscovered the courage to take risks and face challenges? Or will you still be sitting in this same chamber, having the same debates, making the same careful decisions that preserve your comfortable stagnation? The silence that followed was different from the others. This was not the silence of anger or confusion. This was the silence of beings who were finally asking themselves hard questions they had avoided for far too long. Jake could see the impact of his words on faces throughout the chamber. Some aliens looked thoughtful. Others looked troubled. A few looked almost excited, as if they were remembering something they had forgotten long ago. The choice is yours, Jake said softly, but choose quickly. Because whether you grow or not, humanity will continue to evolve. And evolution does not wait for those who are too comfortable to change. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Jake could see the impact of his words on the faces around him. Some aliens looked angry at having their comfortable worldview challenged. Others looked confused, as if they were trying to remember something they had forgotten long ago. But many looked thoughtful, and a few even looked excited. Speaker Thrax finally broke the silence. His mandibles clicked together in a pattern that Jake had learned meant deep concern mixed with growing realization. Ambassador Morrison, you have presented us with a very different perspective on humanity than we expected. But even if we accept your arguments about growth and change, there remains the question of cooperation. How can we work with a species that refuses to accept guidance from more experienced civilizations? Jake smiled, and this time it was neither diplomatic nor predatory. It was the smile of someone who had just been asked exactly the right question. Honored speaker, that question reveals the fundamental misunderstanding that has shaped this entire discussion. You assume that experience is the same as wisdom. You assume that age is the same as knowledge. You assume that because you have existed longer, you must know better. He gestured to the holographic displays still floating above their table. But what if experience without challenge becomes stagnation? What if age without growth becomes decay? What if knowledge without curiosity becomes ignorance? The Zephyrian delegate's crystal body flickered with agitation. You suggest that civilizations that have maintained peace and prosperity for thousands of years have somehow become ignorant? This is absurd. Is it? Jake asked. Tell me, honored delegate, when did your people last discover something that surprised them? When did they last encounter a problem they did not know how to solve? When did they last learn something that changed how they see the universe? The crystalline being's light dimmed slightly, and she did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was uncertain. We have refined our understanding of many things. Refined, Jake repeated. Not discovered. Not learned, refined. You have spent centuries polishing knowledge you already possessed instead of seeking new knowledge you have never imagined. He turned to address the entire chamber. This is why humanity cannot accept your guidance, honored delegates. Not because we are arrogant or ungrateful, but because guidance from those who have stopped learning is not guidance at all. It is a recipe for joining you in your comfortable stagnation. The Eldorian energy being pulsed with what Jake recognized as growing anger. You speak as if our stability and peace were weaknesses rather than achievements. We have eliminated war, ended poverty, and created a galaxy where all species can live in harmony. And in doing so, Jake replied, you have eliminated the forces that drive evolution. You have created a perfect environment where nothing ever changes, nothing ever grows, and nothing ever becomes more than it was before. The Vraxian delegate stood up, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. You make it sound as if conflict and struggle are necessary for a species to remain vital. Surely a truly advanced civilization would find ways to grow without such crude methods. Jake nodded respectfully. Perhaps they would, honored delegate. But the question is not whether there might be better ways to grow. The question is whether you have found those ways. And the evidence suggests that you have not. He gestured to the projection charts still glowing in the air. Look at these curves again. Your civilizations have been flat for centuries. No major discoveries, no breakthrough technologies, no fundamental changes in how you live or think or exist. You have achieved perfect stability by stopping evolution itself. The Morphic Collective delegate rippled with confusion. But surely you must see that constant change can be exhausting. There is value in stability, in knowing what to expect from day to day. There is indeed, Jake agreed. But there is also value in challenge, in discovery, in becoming something more than you were yesterday. The question is not whether stability has value, but whether it has become more important to you than growth. He paused and looked around the chamber. You have all made the same choice, haven't you? You have chosen safety over adventure. You have chosen comfort over challenge. You have chosen certainty over discovery. And in making those choices, you have chosen to stop being truly alive. The chamber erupted in angry voices as dozens of delegates began speaking at once. Jake stood calmly in the center of the storm, waiting for the noise to die down. When it finally did, he continued speaking in the same quiet, steady voice. "This is why humanity must decline your offer of associate membership," he said. "Not because we think we are better than you, but because we refuse to become like you. We refuse to trade our potential for your safety. We refuse to give up our dreams for your comfort." Speaker Thrax's mandibles clicked rapidly. "You would reject the protection and guidance of the Galaxy Council? You would face the dangers of the universe alone?" "We would face them as we always have," Jake replied. "Together, but not controlled. United, but not uniform. Strong, but not stagnant." He turned to Lisa, who nodded and began gathering their materials. "Humanity withdraws its application for membership in the Galactic Trade Federation. We will establish our own trade networks, our own alliances, our own path among the stars." The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of shock rather than contemplation. Jake began walking toward the exit, his delegation following behind him. As they reached the massive doors, he turned back to face the chamber. One final time. "In 50 years, when we return to this galaxy, we will have doubled our territory and tripled our capabilities. We will have faced new challenges and overcome them. We will have grown stronger and wiser and more capable than we are today." He paused and looked directly at Speaker Thrax. "The question is not whether you will be ready to meet us as equals. The question is whether you will still be here at all, or whether you will have become so comfortable in your stagnation that you have forgotten how to exist." The massive doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder. In the silence that followed, more than one alien delegate found themselves wondering if they had just witnessed the birth of something that would change the galaxy forever. Outside the chamber, Lisa caught up with Jake. "That was either the most brilliant diplomatic performance in human history or the most catastrophic mistake we have ever made." Jake smiled and looked up at the alien stars shining through the station's transparent dome. "History will be the judge of that. But I suspect the galaxy will never be the same." Behind them, the council chambers remained in stunned silence. They had expected submission and received defiance. They had offered condescension and been met with challenge. For the first time in millennia, the established order had been shaken to its core. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what humanity would do next.